Welcome back. In this video we're going to start working on a sand shader. So here we are in the course materials.blend file. We've just finished our brick and we're going to move on to sand. So let's get rid of our plane for the moment. Let's go into our camera view using 0 on the number pad, and we're going to add in a monkey head mesh. And the reason we're using the monkey head mesh and not just a plane or a sphere will become apparent in the next video, so don't worry about that. I'm going to scale this up a little bit. Use Ctrl A to apply that scale, and we're going to use Ctrl 3 to add a few subdivisions, and we're just going to shade that smooth. Now I think I want to rotate this around so I can get a nicer view of the object, and just move that a little bit so it's recentered right back in the middle of the camera. We're going to add a new material to this, and we're just going to call this sand. Now with our object selected and our sand material added, we have our principled node as usual. We're going to grab texture, noise texture, use Ctrl T to add in our mapping and texture coordinates, but then we're going to connect up our object straight to our noise texture, and we can just get rid of that mapping node. So let's have a look at our noise texture. At the moment this is quite low frequency noise. We really want something much higher frequency. We're going to take this to about 500. We are going to use Ctrl Shift D and duplicate that. This one is going to be at 250. And we're going to duplicate that down. And we'll take this one to about 100. So now we have 3 levels of noise. And you can see they all have different frequency ranges. All these default values, we're going to stick with them for the moment. Now what we want to do is start mixing these together. So we'll just use Ctrl Shift, right click and drag between these two. And we're going to change this to multiply. And we'll put the factor all the way up. Already you can see we're getting quite a sandy texture there. Next we're going to Ctrl Shift, right click and drag between the multiply and the noise texture. And we'll change this to multiply as well. And we can increase or decrease that as we see fit. So now we have a nice basis for our bump map. Let's grab a vector bump node. We'll plug this into our normal input, and we'll plug our result into our height and have a look. And you can see we're getting a really nice grainy texture there with a lot of variation, where we have really high frequency, slightly smaller frequency, and then the smallest frequency on top. Now at this stage you might want to start tweaking some of these nodes, maybe adding or removing some of the influence from these different nodes. I think this second one, taking this to about 0.5, looks a bit nicer, and that should be a nice basis for our bump map. We also want to use these nodes for our roughness map. So I'm going to actually use this multiply node and plug it straight into our roughness map and look at the result. Now you can see that we have some areas there that are actually shiny, which we don't really want. So we'll grab a color ramp node, plug this in. We're going to take this black value and we're going to make this a value of 0.4. which takes out a lot of that shininess, but still leaves a little bit of reflection. Of course, this material is already very rough, so we won't really see much of an effect of that. And this white value, let's take that to maybe about 0.8. So we're not making it completely rough, we're just giving it a nice variation over the surface. Now, at the moment, we don't have a sand color at all here. So let's grab a mix color node. And what I want to do here is just create a couple of variations of color in our material. So let's go to our image editor. I'm going to open up a reference image that I downloaded. Obviously you can find your own reference image on Google. Just type in sand. Most likely you're going to get a lot of beaches and a lot of deserts. In this case I found this sand sculpture, which I think has a lot of nice texture details that I'm going to use in the next video. Now just a little note on the reference image that I'm using here. It's called Sand Sculptures at Dublin Castle, Emotional States, reference -107058 by William Murphy. Now this is a Creative Commons CC2 image, So it is usable for creative and commercial use, and you are able to change that image, but you do have to attribute the image to its original creator, William Murphy. If you decide to use this image or look for any other image on Google, just make sure that you pay attention to the correct Creative Commons. On Flickr, for example, you can scroll down to additional info and look at the license history, and it will tell you exactly what that original license is. And clicking this will give you a link to creativecommons.org, and that will give you all the information about how to use the attribution, such as giving appropriate credit and indicating whether any changes were made. We're just going to pick a couple of colours from this. We'll just grab this light colour and a kind of darker value here. We'll plug this into our base colour. And let's just see what happens if we choose any of these noise textures as the mix. So let's have a look at that one. We're getting a nice variation there. Let's try the next frequency up. That looks nice as well. Let's try this one. We don't really see much of an effect there, so I think we either want to go with the scale of 100 or the scale of 250. We could also try these ones as well to see if we get something we prefer. And I think we're just going to stick with 250. I think we get a nice variation of shades there. Now what I also want to do is I also want to add in the odd little black speckle on top. So let's duplicate this mix node. Let's grab this high frequency texture. We're going to make this black. We're going to set this to multiply. We'll plug in this factor and we're going to grab a color ramp. We'll plug this in here. I'll just move this up above it so it's a little bit clearer what I'm doing. Let's zoom in a little bit here and we can get rid of that reference image for the moment. And let's look at our result. So what we want to have here is we want to just have the odd speck of white. So we want to bring this black value all the way up. Let's just tweak this value so we can see exactly what's happening here. Let's just make this bright red so we can absolutely tell if we're getting our colours appearing on our material. So you can see our reds are just coming in there. Okay, so I think that's about the right setting, and let's just change this back to black. It's always a good idea to use a colour that's really contrasting with what you've got if you're unsure whether your material or your colour ramp or your mixes are having the right effect. And using something like a bright green or a bright red tends to usually be a good option. So now you can see that we have those odd little black specks all over our sandy material. And I actually think that looks pretty good for our colour. The next thing I want to do is just point out something with the roughness. Overall on flat areas, sand looks pretty rough. It's not a flat surface, so it doesn't have diffuse reflections. But what it does do, it does pick up quite a nice sheen from any light source. Now, we do have a setting in here that we could use. We could use sheen and sheen tint to start faking that. But in actual fact, what I think I want to do is just fake it using Fresnel. So you'll remember that the Fresnel effect means that if we look at the very edge of an object, we get a much brighter highlight. Whereas if we look at an object straight on, we're going to get much less of a highlight. So we're going to add one more mix node in here, duplicate that and plug it in. The colour here is going to be white, or we might even take this light sand colour and maybe just increase the value of that a little bit. And we're going to use an input Fresnel node. And the way this is going to work is on our edges, we're going to get more of this light colour. So we'll just plug this factor directly in here. Now, let's just have a look at our scene and just check that we've got a sun lamp in here, which we do. Let's make sure we have an outdoor scene. Let's just increase the strength of that to 2. So we have this set to multiply. We really want that on mix. And you can see we've got those nice Fresnel reflections there, or those nice little highlights. Now let's just mute this node. So this is without, and this is with. So we're just getting that nice kind of sheen on our surfaces there. And that pretty much takes care of our sand texture. Okay, so it's challenge time. So your challenge is to use frames, labels and colours to tidy up the sand shader node tree. Feel free to adjust any of the settings and any of the noise maps or the colour maps, and once you're happy with your material, mark the shader as an asset for your material library. So pause the video, have a go at that, and in a moment I'll show you how I tidied up my shader tree. Hope you had fun with that last challenge. I'm just going to very quickly tidy up this shader tree. Now I have quite a few nodes here to deal with. These nodes essentially all make up the bump portion of our shader. So we'll grab those, we'll put them in a node group using Ctrl J. We'll hit N and we'll just call this bump. And we'll change our colour over to this purple colour. And these nodes all make up our colour. So we'll use Ctrl J. We'll add a colour to these. I'm just going to go with this yellow colour, or we can try and pick it from this RGB node. And we'll call this diffuse. And the colour ramp node that's going into our roughness, we just have one node there, so I'm not going to worry too much about that. I'm just going to move this down a little bit. Now we don't have any other nodes in this scene, so we don't have to worry about anything else. So I'll just grab this texture coordinate node and I'll move it next to these noise textures since we're only using it in the bump at the moment. I'm going to go up to my asset. So I'm going to go up to Suzanne in the outliner, just open up the object, open up the mesh, and we're going to right click and we're going to mark that sand shader as an asset. Now in the next video, we're going to take this shader even further by duplicating it, renaming it, and tweaking the bump map to give us a much nicer effect for sand sculptures. See you in the next video.